Hi, thanks for hitting play on this. I really appreciate it. A little bit about me before I get started. I'm a registered voter in Michigan, and I voted for the GOP this year. To be clear, I'm not a poll worker. I'm not a poll challenger. I wasn't at the TCF Center for the election. I'm just a citizen in Michigan that's concerned about election integrity, especially with respect to the 2020 presidential election. Ever since the election, I've been following all this very closely for the past month or so. Um, Actually, I called my senator about this and asked him to ask him how he feels about this. Didn't talk to him. His aide said though that he feels that some action should be taken, but many people in Lansing were not sure about claiming the electors going down that route. Me personally, I can say that I strongly feel that we need to go down this route. Um, and why do I feel this way? The reason why is because I do not trust how the absentee ballots were counted. And if you watched the two hearings last week, I'm sure that you would come to the same conclusion as well. Um, just a couple examples as to why I feel this way. There's many more, but there's four key ones here. Number one, just right out of the gate, the political affiliation of the poll workers themselves, the people that are counting all these absentee ballots, they were purposefully skewed to be Democrats. Okay, so to be clear, at every table there's two people, and there should be one Democrat and one Republican counting those absentee ballots. That way there's transparency. They purposely skewed this so only Democrats, or almost all of the people counting were Democrats. And then you'll hear in the testimony how they did this. Number two, poll workers used COVID to prevent GOP poll challengers from doing their job. They singled out GOP poll challengers to reduce transparency. So they couldn't do their job, so they couldn't see what these poll workers were doing. They did this on purpose. They were trained to do this. This is also in the testimony. Poll workers were not following procedure, either because malicious reasons or because they weren't trained enough. Either way, they were caught running thousands of ballots through multiple times. So these ballots, these absentee ballots, they'll come in packs of 50. When you run them through the machine, you're only supposed to run, the counter on the machine is only supposed to read 50 max. But these poll workers, they have access to the ballots after they've been put through the machine. They don't go in a secure container. And so they'll take those ballots. Many of these absentee ballots, as you know, were for Biden. They take these ballots and they run them through the machine again and again and again, 8, 9, 10 times. So instead of 50, you see numbers on the machine that you'll see in the testimony, 2, 3, 4, 500 ballots on this machine. It's because they're recounting the same ballots. Another one is, final one here I just want to mention is this 4 a.m. ballot dump with no chain of custody. Tens of thousands of ballots being dumped off at 4 o'clock in the morning. No one knows where they're from. No one, to my knowledge, I don't know where these ballots came from. So I would be very interested to know where these ballots came from and why they did not arrive to the absentee counting center on time. Should they be counted at all? So just to sum this up, they broke our laws. The laws are there for a reason. They're there for transparency. They're there because at the end of the election, we want everyone to accept the results. They broke that trust with us. There is no transparency. All I hear is accept this, accept this, accept this, or you're a racist. This is what they're telling the Board of Canvassers. Accept this or you're a racist. Approve this or you're a racist. Accept this or I'm going to dox you and your children. Basically threatening the chairman of the Board of Canvassers. Unbelievable. Accept this and move on. This is what we hear from the media and social media. Accept this and move on. No, no, we're not going to allow this to stand. Okay, we're not going to accept this. In 2016, I voted for Hillary Clinton. Believe it or not, I voted for Hillary Clinton. And I accepted those results. I know that there were some problems in Michigan, but I accepted those results because I didn't see these kinds of issues, at least not on this scale. This, we're not accepting this. We're not moving on. We can't allow this to stand and deal with it next time. There is no next time. There is no next time. If they steal this election, what makes you think that they're not going to steal the next one and the next one? Why should I even bother voting? Okay, so I've said my piece about that. Now onto this video. So I made this video because I wanted to make sure that everyone has watched the testimony. There's a lot of testimony. There's 12 hours of testimony. There's about 60 witnesses there. They're all obviously not in this video. But what I've done is I've consolidated the video and I've broken it up into just different sections, and so you can see the trends. So when you're watching all the testimony, over a long period of time, sometimes it's kind of hard to pick up on the trends. I've gone through all of that for you, so you can see the trends a little bit better. And I've also included some supplemental material that came out of the election that, if you haven't seen it, that I think that you will find it interesting. You'll understand why many of us feel that we cannot trust the election result that's being reported. Anyway, I really appreciate you listening to me at the beginning of this. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this. I hope this is helpful. I hope this is insightful. This is a lot of work to put together in 3 days. So anyway, thanks for your attention and take care. And let's please save this republic. Thank you.
We saw at the TCF Center was absolutely unacceptable. When you see where they are purposely violating a court order regarding the 6-foot rule, a purposeful violation. This isn't some old court order. This was right before the election. They knew darn well about that court order, and they purposely violated that. Chain of custody issues, absolutely huge. To have boxes that are open with ballots, shocking. It's a box. You can't find a box that actually does its job. And then when you see, and there's video proof of this, not only just the testimony today, but you can see it online where when Republicans were being kicked out, they were being cheered. People were cheering when Republicans were being kicked out. And Republicans were not being let in to fill those spots. When you see the number of out-of-balance precincts, out-of-balance counting boards, not just this election, but previous elections as well in the city of Detroit, the citizens of Detroit deserve better.
We want a full forensic audit in Wayne, Macomb, Oakland, Kent County, and Antrim County before you guys can certify this election, because it has not been truly certified based on the fraudulent activities that took place in this state. And before you vote, I wish somebody would reach out to leadership and tell them to please stop saying we haven't seen any evidence to overturn the election yet. We have. Please do not send any electors to the Electoral College on December 14th until those full forensic accountings are done in Wayne, Macomb, Oakland, Kent, and Antrim counties. Thank you.
I began observing the process of ballots at several counting boards. I quickly noticed that none, and I mean none, of the names were being scanned from the ballots were in the electronic poll books. All of the names that were found in the supplemental sheets. We know that the poll books, the electronic poll books, were updated on Sunday, November 1st. That meant that all of these new ballots had to have been brand new registered voters on Monday, November 2nd, or Tuesday, November 3rd. I found it very hard to believe that tens of thousands of people had registered in just 2 short days. So I began writing down the names on the ballots immediately after they were scanned by the computer poll worker. As soon as I began, I was severely obstructed by 5 different persons that I could no longer, such that I could no longer continue my legal responsibility as a poll challenger. These 5 persons comprised of a poll worker, a supervisor, an uncredentialed person, a Democrat challenger, and one of the top leaders of the AVCB. The details can be found on my affidavit. Does anyone believe that 30 or 40,000 new voters were actually signed up legally in 2 days? I implore every member of this board to protect the Constitution. I implore you to give us a full forensic audit.
My name is Linda Lee Tarver. I'm a Michigan voter, former Michigan Civil Rights Commissioner, a retired state employee, and a Republican activist. I'm a public servant under 5 Secretaries of State, including Richard Austin, Candace Miller, Terry Lynn Land, Ruth Johnson, and I was delighted to retire under the current Secretary of State. I have been under 7 years under Secretary of State Ruth Johnson. In that role, I was the Community Affairs Director and Election Integrity Liaison. I assisted in preparing cases for referral to Attorney General Bill Schuette to prosecute for voter fraud. Ballot harvesting in Detroit, Flint, and Pontiac has been going on for decades. It's a misdemeanor to give your ballot to anyone not allowed by law to receive it, and it's a felony to take that ballot. People have been prosecuted in Michigan over the years as a result. Ballot stuffing, ballot curing, and complete fraud in the issuance, handling, and processing of ballots has not been addressed, and no election after 2020 should be considered fair unless we get this right this year. The complete hate, disdain, and apathy for Republican poll challengers is but one way of how elections are stolen in Michigan. Before COVID-19, and I'm talking to the Democrat in the House, and in every election in the last 25 years, Republican poll challengers were removed by the police, especially in Pontiac. MCL 168.733 says, the election inspectors and other election officials on duty shall protect a challenger in the discharge of his or her duties. Shall protect is not an option. Shall protect. It is never done in the urban areas. Never, never, never in the urban areas. In the 34 years I've been working for the state of Michigan, and certainly not the 29 years I've been working at the Secretary of State. It also says in subsection 4, a person shall not threaten or intimidate a challenger while performing an activity allowed. You shall not threaten or intimidate. It is a misdemeanor for what they have done, these inspectors, to continue to intimidate and throw out Republican poll challengers. It has been going on too long. 71% of Detroit precincts, our largest city, cannot be recounted. As always expressed as minor clerical errors, these are not minor. There are touch points in the process for these ballots to be, and the accounting to be done, those ballots to be open. In order for this fraud to be corrected, we need a complete audit. You need to have optics on it. This has always been done in communities of color. It needs to stop. Enforce the laws and ensure, bring in independent inspectors. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Around 7:30 a.m. on November 3rd, over the microphone, everyone was asked how many Republican poll workers there were by a show of hands. When announced there were 2, I looked around and couldn't see any hands going up from where I was sitting. Not having at least one Republican poll worker at the 134 tables made it impossible for ballots to be duplicated legally. Also, there were no Republican poll workers to see the ballots being secured at the end of the process as well.
The first thing in the morning before the work started on November 3rd, Mr. Baxter was speaking to the entire community at TCF, and I found it interesting when he asked for a show of hands of how many Republican poll workers there were. From my quick peruse of the view of the room, I saw no hands go up. And I commented to one of the workers that I was with, wow, that's a surprise. I don't see any Republican hands go up.
Well, right away, of course, we know rules were broken because there were very, very few. I counted less than 5 when there was the hand raise of Republican poll workers in the room. There's supposed to be 1 at every counting table, at least, and there wasn't.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members, for this opportunity. My name is Adam DeAngeli, and I was a poll worker in the election for the city of Detroit, not a poll challenger, but a poll worker as an employee working at a polling place as a ballot box inspector on election day, November 3rd. I think I'm only the second person today who was a poll worker, so I can answer the question I think you may all have about why so many poll challengers were impeded. I took not 1 but 2 poll worker trainings for the city of Detroit, one for ballot inspector on October 14th and one for electronic poll book inspector on October 15th. And in both of those trainings, it was emphasized to the students in the classroom that the social distancing requirements could be used to impede poll challengers. In fact, both trainings emphasized that if poll workers got angry about it, we should call the police on them as a first resort. In fact, at the second training, we had a trainee, as they were explaining the social distancing rule, they said they have to wear a mask, they have to stay 6 feet back, and that's important because they can come behind your table, but if they don't have 6 feet behind your table, they can't come back there. So a trainee asks, so if they're 6 feet back, they can't actually see. And the trainer says, exactly, not unless they've got really good vision or they brought their binoculars. And later on, another trainee asked, what if they get really mad and they're yelling? And the trainer responded, quote, 911, call the police on them, have them thrown up out of there. Knowing from these trainings that the city was setting up a confrontational setting in which poll challengers would be completely unable to perform their duties, I told others what I had been told, and I provided the audio that I had recorded of the poll worker trainings.
Challengers and poll watchers, they have to wear a mask and they have to stay 6 feet. That's important because they can come behind your table. But if you don't have 6 feet, they can't come back there. Any questions?
So for 6 feet back, once they have really good vision, they can actually see.
Exactly. Unless they got really good vision or they brought their binoculars. 6 feet. That's the rule, right? And you are entitled to your 6 feet.
Is that common? I mean, can we expect that?
Yep, there's a coming. They're coming. I don't know if they're coming to every precinct, but they're coming to many of them in the city. Yes, we have already gotten word. The state has already said they're coming. And the basic thing they're going to challenge is what? Absentee ballot. That is correct. Yes.
What if they're like challenging and they start yelling and kind of making a scene?
911. They got standards. They got conduct standards.
Okay.
They make a scene, get them up out of there. All the police are.
This led to a lawsuit against the Secretary of State filed on Friday, October 23rd. The plaintiffs in that lawsuit, one was a gentleman testifying earlier this afternoon, and another will be your colleague in the House next year. There's a hearing on the suit and resolution was reached in the morning of Wednesday, October 28th, 6 days before Election Day. That hearing is online at the Court of Claims YouTube page. You can watch it. It concluded with the Secretary of State agreeing to amend the policy to say that poll challengers would socially distance except as necessary to perform their duties. And critically, Judge Cynthia Stevens said, quote, I am more concerned that you get this directive out and amend the frequently asked questions for election workers than I am about this court's docket. Judge Stevens understood how time-sensitive and important this was. Both the hearing and the final order specified that this revised policy was to be made known to poll workers. I can tell you, as a poll worker in the city of Detroit on Election Day, nobody there was advised of this policy change. And in fact, the poll challengers were sitting at the end of our cafeteria table all the way at the end the entire day. Now, you might ask why I didn't tell the challengers myself about the policy, and the answer was because they're for the other side, which leads to another important point that I think you might have some questions about, which is how it is that so many of the poll workers were not real Republicans. Well, at both of the poll worker trainings I attended, they had made the point of announcing that the electronic poll book inspectors included many teenagers. And in fact, at the EPI training I took on October 15th, a clear majority of people in the room were in fact teenagers. So for all the people that came up today that said they applied to be a poll worker but didn't get the job, there was something going on that was coordinating the hiring of employees for a certain purpose. Now you'll know, or maybe you don't know, but I assume you do, poll workers are required to specify their party affiliation. They can't say they're independents. Well, what's your party affiliation when you're a minor and you're not even eligible to vote? We were instructed at the training that provisional ballots were used to mislead ineligible voters as essentially phony ballots that would be destroyed by the Department of Elections. It's all in the affidavit and also linked to the recording of the complete poll worker trainings from start to finish.
As a poll worker, I trained at Wayne County Community College. You were almost threatened or taught to threaten a poll challenger. They came right out and said, you don't have to listen to them, you don't have to speak to them, they can't get near you, they cannot talk to you, you don't answer them, and if they continue to question you, then call the police. Literally, that's what the instructor told us to do. Call the police, have them removed.
Thank you.
Another thing that I noticed is that there were Democratic challengers there,
I don't even call them challengers. They were agitators. They were only there with one purpose. When GOP people or nonpartisan people signed up, we were only trying to ensure that there was integrity. Whereas when Democratic challengers signed up, their only purpose there was to intimidate the GOP people and get them out. So that was what was happening on the 4th when I got on the floor. I didn't have my GOP tag on, so automatically I was assumed to be a Democrat. And I have seen some women who came to me and said, let's get these MFs out. Then when I saw that she was targeting white male Republicans, accusing them of something like your mask slipped, you were not 6 feet away, so you need to go out, and your phone was out, and they were really intimidating all these white people. And I put myself out there, tried to help them, saying, why are you getting them in trouble? And they said, why are you taking their side? Then I showed my GOP tag, and then she said to me that I'm on the wrong side because I had a GOP tag on. But then at that point, I saw that Republicans were getting escorted, and so many people got escorted that we became pretty scarce. We couldn't even man, we had only one person manning 4 or 5 tables because we were so low on numbers. And there were so many Democratic challengers there. So I just went to Election Integrity Fund and got my nonpartisan tag. And the reason I did that was not because I was not there for my party or trying to do something on behalf of my party. I'm just trying to ensure that the right thing is being done. So when I got the nonpartisan tag, at the counting board, the poll workers were very respectful because of my nonpartisan tag. But when I had the GOP tag, the first thing they said is 6 feet. You know the rule or you will be sent out. And I'm like, when I had the nonpartisan tag, a lot of rules didn't apply to me. So that just told me that, those poll workers, the Democratic challengers, ACLU, and so many other people that were there, their only job there was to block the GOP challengers from doing their job. And when I was with the nonpartisan tag and talking to Democratic challengers, most of them didn't even know what to challenge in a ballot. When I asked them a question, when I was asking supervisor a question, those people were literally confused because they didn't even know what I was asking. And then when I asked one lady, where did you get trained? She said, trained for what? Because they didn't know what they were there for. Their only job, I could tell there, was to block the GOP people from challenging or intimidate them and get them out.
There, I began working on the duplicate ballot process, where one poll worker would hold the ballot that they needed to duplicate, and the other would have a blank ballot, and they would duplicate it. And then there was a witness that would stand behind them. And I knew the procedure at every table because, like I said, I had been trained to be an election worker, so I knew what was going on. We were never told that the person that was inspecting the ballot, their job was to stand in front of the Republican poll challenger, but consistently, that's what we saw. Whenever we would try to watch the process, the person that was inspecting the ballot would stand in front of us, and if we tried to move to the side, one of the agitators that were at the TCF Center, and there were lots of agitators that were there working on behalf, in my opinion, of the Democrat Party. They would challenge us and tell us to stand back, that we were too close, that we were going to kill people with COVID. So that's what we encountered, and we were not allowed to get up close to the ballots. It just was prohibited, wasn't allowed. At one point, when the military ballots came in, we were told to take a break, that it was a good time to take a break. I'd been there for 6 hours. I worked for a total of 13 hours that day, and the only time I sat down because Republican poll workers had to go upstairs to another room to get lunch or to sit on a chair. Democrats and the agitators all had a corner where food was brought into them. They were served food. They didn't have to leave. When it was time to go to lunch, we had to leave because we didn't have food provided. We had to go to another room. When we got back, the doors were locked. I was able to get back into the room, but I witnessed pizza boxes being placed over the windows so that the poll challengers couldn't see in, and those were being placed over the windows by election workers and by the agitators that were down there.
They're not even I've been trying for half an hour. They're just looking at a picture of what he's saying, so I don't hear what he's saying.
I don't know if you can blow it up because it's not big enough. Stop it into the door now.
2 or 3 of the poll workers literally screaming at me to get back 6 feet. At no time were we able actually to physically see the ballot and then see it in the poll electronic book. And they told me, sorry, I should have planned better.
Several of the poll workers yelling, cussing, all kinds of nasty things at a lot of the poll challengers, including myself. I mean, it was just rampant, going on all night. I tried to raise challenges and was denied several times. So I know that there were things going on that were not lawful and should not have been going on. It does not give us a free and fair election, and that's why I'm here to tell you.
There was a lot of intimidation and hostility vented toward the Republican challengers. I experienced a lot of that as well. By midday on Wednesday, there were no more Republicans allowed into the room. There was a lot of intimidation around those who were in the room, particularly the men and the lawyers, and they were hauled out forcibly by the police for really no good reason, while the whole room of workers cheered. This is intimidating. They stood and they cheered repeatedly as Republicans were hauled out for doing their job. This is wrong. I personally was the victim of 2 different accounts of intimidation, one by workers, supervisors included, and one by Republican poll challengers or watchers. In both cases, I had raised my hand to challenge a ballot. In one case, the ballot was being duplicated. I was being prevented from watching because only 2 workers were doing it, and they were shoulder to shoulder. I'd moved into about 3 feet or so behind them so I could look over their shoulders. The supervisor came over and told me I had to get out of there at least 6 feet away. I told her that by the rules, election rules, I could move in during the time that I was watching the ballot while it was being duplicated.
1 minute left.
She was yelling at me. The second time I was surrounded by Democrat challengers who, again, were yelling at me, calling me a racist, telling me my mother didn't love me, all kinds of, stupid but meant to intimidate things. This is wrong. We all deserve a fair ability to vote our conscience and to participate in the election process. This did not happen at TFC, and it needs to be audited, and we're counting on you to do it. Thank you.
I witnessed the room erupt in thunderous applause and derogatory cheering as Republican poll workers were picked off one by one and ejected from the room repeatedly by police escort throughout the day. By the end of the day, they had picked off so many GOP poll workers that there were probably only a few dozen left to monitor all of the processing stations in the room, which I'm told was between 130 and 160. I had to move between several tables. One was processing a stack of roughly 35 ballots with pink challenge stickers on them. Many other tables also had similar stacks on them as well. None of the ballots appeared to be in the poll database, so the poll workers were simply entering 1/1/1900 as the birth dates and entering the addresses and names that no one seemed to be verifying and which I could not see to verify. When I would politely try to check such things, as had been the case throughout the entire day, I was told that I wasn't allowed within 6 feet of the tables even to verify ballots, and told that I was trying to kill people. I watched as the table simply passed in mismatched ballots and envelopes through the checking station. When I challenged it, and subsequent ballots that weren't in the poll book, the table supervisor laughed and said, "You can't do that." And several other operatives gave me the COVID runaround as I had gotten throughout the day, all trying to intimidate me and prevent me from doing my job, claiming that I was endangering their workers, trying to kill their people, and even holding a pen in a threatening way. Yet, when non-GOP operatives would stand near the tables and harass me, no one would give them any problem at all. At one point, a Democrat who was hanging back came up to harass me, and then a table supervisor showed up and because I was challenging a ballot. Once several table managers and non-GOP operatives have showed up to harass me, this Democrat operative simply melted back into the background with a satisfied grin on his face, knowing that he had caused me a problem. These people were like professional agitators whose job it was to sow discord among GOP workers who were trying to do their job and then get them kicked out. At some point, a GOP lawyer was brought in and confirmed that I was properly performing my duties. Instead of backing down, the table supervisor's supervisor and his supervisor and all the damn supervisors, they came up and they started arguing with the lawyer, telling him he didn't know what the law was.
I was unable to challenge a ballot due to the consistent intimidation, harassment, and verbal attacks throughout the day. This came from Democrat challengers, independents, a lawyer, team leaders, supervisors. I was threatened to be escorted out by a Democrat lawyer.
In the hostile environment, I got there at 12:30. Tried to go in at 2 o'clock. They wouldn't allow us to come in, even though we know Republicans, poll watchers had left, and they need to be replaced. They wouldn't let us in until 6 o'clock is when I got in. At 6:06 in Book 1, I was recorded. Left at 8:30. For those full 2.5 hours,
1 minute.
I watched violations of the rules that I was told to watch out for.
At 2 p.m., I left the room for 5 minutes. Right after I left the room, they blocked it out, covered the windows up. I couldn't get back in for exceeded COVID capacity. I called the federal prosecutor. I called the FBI, made a report. I called the Secretary of State fraud tip line. I called Detroit Department of Elections multiple times, and there was no answer.
I saw person after person getting kicked out of the room, and it was almost like, here's a shiny object in the room over here, look at this commotion while we do this over here. And I witnessed that on several occasions. I'd also like to say that at one point I heard reports, oh, there's 134 Republicans in the room, we can't let more in, you have enough people. But they didn't, if I may, they didn't let us know that we were to sign out. And all the people that got kicked out were not getting signed out. I witnessed probably about 30 people getting kicked out for not really doing much. Maybe they tried to challenge and weren't allowed.
Several times, election workers tried to remove me from the room with the false accusations that I was impeding their process. They were the ones who blocked me from seeing the ballots, and when allowed, workers would complain. An election worker was brought up to harass me with the base of being too close. However, among themselves, they didn't social distance. Later, poll workers whispered to each other and brought police officers to remove me. It was pretty intimidating having officers approaching me when I had not done anything wrong. I witnessed many Republicans being kicked out of the room, and it was scary. That is not the America I came to a few decades ago. They were mad, kicked out, and not replaced, even though they were Republicans outside to be allowed to enter. It didn't happen. It was hate toward us. That is how I described being there. I didn't come to a country that I will be mistreated in that way. I love this country. I will stand and fight for it, but doesn't really matter. I didn't grow up seeing people by skin colors. No matter who you are, no matter where you came from, you should seek for integrity, because outside the country, we see America as an honest people, filled with honest people with integrity. I want that to be preserved, and that is why we are here.
I was called names whenever my mask fell down even a little below my nose. I'd be called names. I'd say I was killing people, stuff like that, while they'd be talking to somebody not wearing a mask. People at the polling centers weren't wearing masks, the people who were doing the duplicating. It was just very unorganized. So I arrived around the time when the windows were being boarded up with cardboard boxes and signs and stuff like that. And when I walked in, I was confused on why they weren't letting challengers in and why these boards were being put up. And the people around me were also confused, so we decided to ask questions. Nobody around us could give us an answer. We were ignored, and people were walking in and out. We had no clue how these people were being let in and out. There was really nobody constituting it correctly. So after about an hour of waiting, I was an independent, so I had somebody come up to me and ask me, hey, are you an independent? I said yes, and I was let in. It was me and about 8 other people. Once I got in, I signed in, and I noticed right away that it was very chaotic in there. There was groups of people in the middle where somebody testified earlier and said there's empty ballots in the middle of the room. There were groups around those empty ballots where it would be easy for somebody to grab these ballots, hide them, or take them somewhere without being seen. I noticed a commotion in the back right corner, so I decided to go over and see what was going on. And another independent challenger, I asked him what happened. He told me he was being told to stay back. There were more than, I'd say, about 9 people around this table. There's just a lot of commotion going on. He said that he was told he had to leave as an independent challenger, and they wanted a new challenger in. So I felt that was wrong. With these manual ballots, after we watched the duplication process go on, they brought more ballots over, and we watched them scan the ballots and put in the date 1/1/1900. I was actually with the Democratic challenger too. We were both confused on why this was happening. So we decided to call over a supervisor who the only response we got was, oh, that's the default date that we put. I didn't ask any other questions, neither did he. Didn't ask any questions in the fear that I'd be kicked out, as I just witnessed 4 other Republicans/independents get kicked out.
And yes, there was a trough of blank ballots in the center for all the world to see, and welcome to take as many as you wanted, especially after hours. I am an administrator. I've done it for many, many years. I've done fraud at banks, embezzlements, and I've never seen administrative procedure so chaotic. It was a circus in there. They were banging on the doors. I didn't know if I was going to go under the table or leave the building. I could not do my job. So if you expected me to do it, I couldn't. It wasn't flowing right.
Definitely a hostile environment when I walked in. I did not expect to see what I saw. And part of the hostility was definitely COVID. They used that as an excuse from the minute we walked in. And it was also an excuse to throw people out. You could have had your mask below your nose, and it was an excuse to throw you out. And the whole irony of it is you had to stay 6 feet away from people so that we were forced not to see the ballots. But at the end of the day, when it was time to go home, they had us leave at the end of the room, and it was by escalator. So if you can imagine just a herd of cattle going up the escalator on the way out, that was okay. You could all smash in like a herd of cattle on the way out, and it was fine. So if you were trying to keep people safe, it did not matter at the end of the day. But as you were watching ballots, it made a difference. They kept us away from the ballots on purpose. They used COVID to throw us out.
There seemed to be a concerted effort to let us know that we were not welcome, very unfriendly and at times hostile. At one point, I witnessed a challenger walk up to a lady to look at the ballot. She turned aggressively, brandishing a long metal letter opener to the gentleman, and in a threatening manner pointed the sharp object towards his chest and demanded that he move back, move back. He backed up, and she took a step forward towards him, still pointing the sharp object at his chest and repeating back up. She said it at least 4 times. Another time I was standing more than 6 feet away from a counting board table when a man forcefully demanded, "Get back, COVID, COVID, get back." It was impossible for us to see what he and anyone else was doing at the table. And clearly that was his goal. Several of us challengers watched quietly for over a long, long time for the military ballots. At one point, several police officers came in and stood between us and the ballots, a little over to the side, but a man came up and said that we were to disperse. I said we were being respectful and standing more than 6 feet away. He said, it has nothing to do with COVID. You are interfering with the process. We were standing quietly doing nothing, but we spread out in the aisles like good little sheep. We couldn't see, of course, from there.
Military ballots come in a particular format that they cannot be processed with. So they have to
Correct.
be transcribed from the ballot that they mailed in to the ballot that's consistent with the precinct that they're at. So that's the reason why the military ballots are being so closely watched, is because everyone by necessity has to be transcribed onto a specific ballot that's different from the one that they sent.
Not one of the military ballots was a registered voter, and the ballots looked like they were all exactly the same Xerox copies of the ballot. They were all for Biden across the board. There wasn't a single Trump vote, and none of the the voters were registered. They had to manually enter the names and addresses and a birth date of 1/1/2020, which would override the system and allow them to enter non-registered voters, of which I saw several that day. Throughout the day, that's how they would override voters that were neither in the electronic poll book or the supplemental updated poll book.
Thank you. And I was working with one particular table when I was witnessing the military ballots, and I found it highly unusual that every military ballot that was logged into the system had a birth date of January 1st, 1900. And nobody could tell me why the birth dates were 1900. When I went to challenge those votes, the supervisor at the table told me, and I quote, "We're not doing that."
Okay. I saw several dozen military ballots throughout the day. I only saw 3 that were for President Trump.
I was briefed on 2 things to look for. One was when they were doing duplicate ballots, there was supposed to be a Republican and a Democratic witness. When they were doing the military ballots, I asked, where's the Republican witness? And they said, it's you. And I said, no, it has to be a paid worker. She says, well, I don't know what they are. The supervisor did, I don't know what they are. Ask him. So I asked him. The poll worker said, well, I ain't going to tell you. So it was obvious. I challenged it. They only, out of the 8 to 10 that I saw, they only took the challenge for the first one. They wouldn't record the challenge for the other ones.
We were standing 6 feet away, and the other parties were at the table, even sitting down at the table with them. I witnessed this on several occasions. The Democrat challengers were sitting down at the table with them, helping them duplicate ballots, and we weren't allowed within 6 feet.
And as I was walking later, I saw a woman named Karen, who she's going to be speaking soon. She was raising her voice, so I went over and asked her if there was an independent challenger at her table, which she said no. And they were blocking her view from seeing the ballots, so I offered to tell her what I'm seeing when they're duplicating these ballots, because she was in fear that she would be kicked out if she spoke up and challenged any more than she did.
And one example of me not being able to do my job were the military votes. Military votes I was unable to see at all. The first one, forget it. They wouldn't even let me do it because they said, we're starting and you're going to slow down the process, so we're not going to show it to you. So that was the end of that. And I was like, at the top of my voice, I needed help. Nobody was helping me except young gentleman, a couple young gentlemen, but specifically Evan Schock. He was an independent, and he came in there to help me because they would not allow me to see the ballots. They were 6 inches apart. I was supposed to stay 6 feet. Was that the law? Well, that's the way it works in there. So he had to help me. He had to like rubberneck himself and tell me what each ballot said. Well, I challenged, and I lost, and Evan had to help me. I mean, I was, I'm a pretty, I'm capable of taking care of myself, and I don't know why a young man has to help me and assist me in reading the ballots. That's ridiculous. It was all ridiculous. I would invalidate the whole room because that's how ridiculous it was.
The Democrats that came in, they came in 2 different groups throughout the evening. There was 2 groups, and they weren't there to watch the process. They were there to watch us. They were standing behind me. I was 6 feet away from the table. They were behind me. They weren't watching what was going on. And at one point, I had 2 girls with their phones up, like they were recording me.
I watched workers take hours sorting military ballots into containers labeled with corresponding precinct numbers. In all our time there, I never saw those ballots being taken and processed. It was a long, long lag time. And during that time, the people at the counting board sat idly doing nothing. And I was wondering, why are they taking so long to get these to the table so they can be processed? And it occurred to me maybe they were wanting us to leave.
I mean, we as a poll challenger are supposed to verify the name, address on the ballot to the electronic poll book. And if it is not there, then it is supposed to be in a paper poll book, of which there was a significantly large poll worker. Anytime that I said that is not in the book, when she would scan it, it would not come up on the screen, then she would basically hover over this paper book sometimes checking something, and other times we could see that they did not check it. And then they proceeded to manually enter these into the electronic poll book, where then they would come up on the screen. Many of these papers were not absentee ballot, the yellow envelope, the standard ballot. Some of them were on printed paper. Some of them were in white envelopes. Some of them had multiple papers attached to them. So then they would manually enter them into the electronic book.
My personal experience on November 4th, being there, watching ballots come in that aren't in the qualified voter file, they're not on the written log, and yet they're still counting those. And
throughout my training, I was told that the poll workers should not even have pens or pencils at the table. Shortly into the whole process, 150 tables simultaneously started duplicating ballots. And by the admission of several of the people, who are like the supervisors in Detroit, they had 10 to 12 Republican poll workers. So when you think about this, ballots were being duplicated en masse by 3 Democrat poll workers at a time. Where was the oversight in that? A August 4th primary ballot come in, to which they decided they would go ahead and duplicate it to a general election ballot. The first time I tried to do a challenge, the supervisor of that table handed me a book of rules and told me no, and the process would continue.
I was not allowed to perform my job, and from what I observed, were any of the GOP challengers in accordance with Michigan laws. We were constantly prevented from getting close enough to see what was going on with the respect to the ballots. Procedures were not being properly followed. When we brought these to the attention of the supervisors, our concerns were dismissed and ignored. We observed ballots being backdated from 11/4 to 11/2, and data being entered into the computers for these mail-in ballots. Poll workers were entering ballot information from new mail-in ballots, including dates of birth of 1/1/1900, into the electronic poll books and processing those ballots for tabulation. The information wasn't in either the electronic poll book or the paper supplement book prior to that.
So my job was to be stationed at the TCF center. I was in the middle of the room near the duplicate ballots. There's a table full of duplicate ballots. Throughout the whole night, I witnessed theft of duplicate ballots. My job was to follow them back to their tables of the counting boards, and where they would just take stashes of ballots, 4 or 5 ballots, take them to the table. I would stand there for 4 or 5 minutes. They wouldn't make any duplicates, never followed any duplicate procedures. They stashed them under their boxes, never put them in the bins. I couldn't do much about it, just write incident reports about it, which are documented. Based off my sampling, because I was
1 minute.
Okay, sampling off of the dozen of the duplicate ballots from 6 to 2 p.m. The next day, none of those were for Trump. The other 2 rounds, I only saw 1 for Trump. 3 other challengers told me they witnessed the same sampling. I challenged ballots, all refused. Challenging procedure never properly carried out. Never issued challenge ballots, no track or remedy, no record. I resorted to writing incident reports. Poll workers changed duplicate ballots to straight Democrat tickets. That's why you see in the tabulators 2 different tickets. I witnessed employees filling in bubbles for the Democrat straight ticket. At the tabulator, I also witnessed what the Dominion employee said with the rerunning of the ballots. I saw that several times.
Almost all the poll workers were told that they could go home at 11:30, this is on November 4th, p.m., even though none of the ballots were secured until hours after that. Tables with ballots were left unattended and not secure. And even at the end of the night, when they were pretty much wrapping up, I started going through every single one of them, and there was 8 that were locked, but they were not locked. We made sure they were locked. I think it was unintentional, but concerning. Also, I witnessed 46 ballots get put in manually, meaning they were not in the electronic system and they were not in the paper poll books. I recorded each name and ballot number along with how they had the birth date of 1/1/1900. I witnessed majority of these ballots being entered between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. on November 4th.
Ballots that the name of the voter did not appear in the electronic or the supplemental. They had 2 that came in that met that criteria. They sent them back. They came back to the table again, so they raised the red flag to ask the supervisor, whatever the person's name is that was supposed to come in. She told them, oh, well, we checked these are on the list, so I'm going to show you how to get them and enter them to the computer so that they appear, and then we can tabulate this. And they used the fictitious 1900 birth date in it.
Earlier, a gentleman talked about the password, the password to the QVF in the system. There was the piece of paper with the login and the password were taped to each table. And it was admin and this password taped to each table. So God and everyone could get that password.
I had pages of notes of ballots. Here I had an affidavit where I can prove you that I didn't see, we couldn't do anything. There were people entered with a 11900, and I took the time to check those people. They didn't allow me to challenge it. The names of the people are here. While the Democrats are dismissing the finding from challengers, is those people were alive and registered to vote, why they were manually entered? Why weren't the ballot boxes properly sealed by the workers? Several of them were unattended, and I had a list of those tables. Me and another challenger questioned why those boxes were unsealed. The election director proceeded to seal them.
I observed an election worker pull out a ballot from an envelope where the circle was completed next to the name Donald J. Trump. I could see this because the marking was at the very top left corner of the ballot. Instead of processing the ballot, I saw the election worker push the ballot back in the envelope and put it in there in a black container on top of the table. At approximately 11:43 p.m., I heard one of the team leads yell, "This is our house tonight," and further yell, "They gonna do what we tell them to do from here on out." I took that as they're saying, this is the Democrats' house tonight, and the Republicans, independent, or whoever is going to do what we say tonight. I also observed these ballots did not have ballot codes on them. The one, you tear at the top, no ballot code numbers.
So I saw ballots not being processed, just taken out and put back in and stacked up. So they weren't even sent to the tabulator to be processed. This could have been hundreds of ballots. This could have been from a Trump precinct. And Artesia Bomber, who testified earlier, we were at that same table intermittently. She saw it was a Trump ballot. She testified that she saw it being put back in. In my affidavit, these were the tens of ballots that I saw being stacked back up and not tabulated.
They weren't following procedures. So the procedure was that the first person scanned the ballot, it would go to the next person would take out the ballot, read off the ballot number, and confirm that with the first person that scanned it in, and they were not doing that. I asked them why they weren't doing that, and they said they weren't doing that this year. So I watched ballots that were, had the wrong number, that didn't match, the inside ballot did not match the outside of the envelope number. So what they would do is they took white Post-it tape, they put it on the outside of the envelope, and they wrote down the number of the inside ballot number on the outside of the envelope.
I observed numerous employees, city workers, running batches of ballots through the tabulators countless times without discarding them first.
So they were counting the same ballot, the same vote, 9 or 10 times?
Yes, sir.
Were there any Republicans who were observing, or just Democrats?
I saw very few Republicans, about 3. I had called my manager over to a specific tabulating machine. I showed him a number on it, which was close to 500. It should never go over 50. Ballots come in batches of 50. I said, we have a severe problem here. He said, Melissa, I don't want to hear that we have a problem. He said, we are here to assist with IT. We are not here to run their election. That is exactly what he said to me. At that point, I was just really frustrated and upset. I could tell what was going on. I knew what was going on at that point.
What was going on?
He was in on it. He was in on it. They were all in on it.
In on what?
They were cheating. It was very, very apparent. It was apparent he knew. It was apparent that he was in on it. And when he caught on to me knowing Me knowing that he was in on it, he just wanted nothing to do with me.
So how many ballots would you estimate in front of you that you observed were counted multiple times in the machine? Can you put a number to it, an estimated number?
At
best
least
you can
at
do.
least 30,000.
At least 30,000, okay.
I also witnessed the adjudication process. Numerous adjudicators machines were, all the ballots were being judged by 2 Democrats. I heard them talking. One woman said to another woman, "Are you a Republican or are you a Democrat?" She said, "I'm a Democrat." And she said, "Well, so am I. Let's sit together." Sat together all night judging ballots. You know, I mean, thousands of ballots got judged all night by the reason the rule's there is so, you know, it can be a fair process. It wasn't a fair process. This election, I will say, these Democrats took every avenue possible to commit fraud in this election. And what I saw on the 3rd and 4th was over 20 counts of fraud being taking place in front of my face.
I was standing behind the tabulator machines, and I could tell right away that most of those people did not know what to do when a ballot gets jammed. And I had to literally stand behind them and say, you need to discard when a ballot gets jammed. And just like the previous witness, what she was saying, yes, those tabulators were getting jammed, at least, like she said, 3 or 4 times an hour. And if they knew what to do when there is an error, they were doing it right. I mean, to explain to the other person who was asking, when you take the jammed ballot out, you have an option to discard the number. There is a column that says, you know, that's actually tabulating. That's incrementally tabulating every time a ballot gets scanned. So when a ballot gets jammed, you have an option to go and say discard. Then it makes it 0. But you also have an option to continue. So what happens is when you take those one jammed ballot plus the rest of the ones that got tabulated and put them through again, like feed them, if you say continue tabulating, it will add to that 24 or 25 wherever it got jammed, and then again rescan this entire thing. Like she said, the number only has to be 50. I did come across a couple of other machines where the numbers were 300, 400. It's not supposed to be. Similarly, at the county board too, where I witnessed this big stack of ballots that came in with a note saying not in EPB/S, which is not in election poll book or system. I didn't even know that that can even happen, that you can actually have ballots that are not in the poll book or in the system and still be fed into the system. These people were manually entering it, and I have the table numbers where this was getting done, like the counting board numbers. And they didn't know. They were manually feeding it with a birth date of 1900 something. And when I asked the supervisor why they were manually being fed, they said they did not know. They're only doing their job, and if I have a problem, I could go talk to somebody up there.
And I ran into Randy Bishop, and Randy owns radio stations. He's very IT savvy. He said, "Brian, I was here all night. What's going on here is unbelievable." He said, "Let me show you something right now before I leave." So he walked me over to the high-speed scanners and tabulators, and he said, "See all these Ethernet lines running out of the tabulators? They're all bundled together as they accumulate, and then they're all connected to these routers, and then they all go to the main computer." He said, "These are all hooked into the internet, and that is illegal, and it should not be happening because it opens them up to hacking." So
I was there on Tuesday from 6:30 in the morning till when they stopped the count, and that's the thing that nobody's talked about today is things are going very smoothly. And suddenly at 8 o'clock-ish, the gentleman on the kiosk said, "Okay, that's it. You can go home. Stop counting." And they had a stack of ballots, a couple hundred. Things were very slow in the afternoon. But when everything stopped, it was like a sudden shockwave through the room because they were scheduled from 6:30 in the morning till 10 at night. So suddenly they get to go home early, and that's pretty much what I thought. It's like, it's over. The total numbers of the ballots that we counted today, up till now, was 107,000 ballots. Everybody clapped. It was an acknowledgement of a job well done. And then pretty much everybody left. My questioning is, what happened on the midnight shift? Because I came back in at 10:30 in the morning. When I walked into that room, it was like quiet. The dust had settled. It was just kind of a quiet, silent room that was just maybe waking up, but it was still pretty quiet and sleepy in there. So how is it that if they brought in 40,000 votes at 4 o'clock, that they would get all of them done by 10:30? It just doesn't, something about that doesn't make sense to me. And I don't trust that this election was fair and on the up and up.
Tuesday things went very well. When I was called back in early on Wednesday morning, I came back into the room. I could not believe, number one, how many more people were there, the tension in the room, and where did all these ballots come from? When I'd left on Tuesday, most of the tables had been complete. The table I was overseeing at the time still had about 200 ballots left, but it certainly didn't look like there was going to even be enough for a night shift. I was very surprised to see the level of activity on the following morning.
At midnight, Trump was ahead 10%, which was an unusually high amount. To about 2 o'clock in the morning, my monitor went down. It totally rebooted. So unless you can tell me there wasn't a data dump, there wasn't a data breach, I don't believe that the numbers were true, because when I went home and woke up, all of a sudden Biden was ahead. We had processed 120,000 votes by midnight out of the 170,000 absentee ballots we were expecting. So I assumed we were missing about 50,000, and all of a sudden Biden was now missing. The voting had stopped in the middle of the night. So unless you were one of the few processing tables, you would not have seen this rebooting of the laptops.
I would say between 1 a.m. and 4 in the morning, roughly, it was very quiet. It was a very big lull in the overall center. Many people can attest to folks with heads on tables. This was on not only the polling stations or the absentee ballot stations, but also at the tabulator table areas. In fact, I witnessed some person on a tabulator screen playing a card game. I sat there with my son, who was also there as a poll challenger, and another acquaintance as we watched this. So to give you the sense, there was a big lull. Around 4 o'clock, 3:30, I think I've heard 4 o'clock, is by my estimation. There was a delivery, I would estimate, because the table in the center next to the main stage is where the ballots were brought to. Somewhere at least 60 boxes were brought in. They did have a wrap around them, which was very, what I expected to be standard. When that work was basically prepared for people to come up and get it, the person called up and said, come and get your extra work. They were called up by precincts, and then those groups would come in small sections and take these back and then, run them to their table. So just.
I also saw the ballots being dropped off about, 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. I was actually standing next to the lead attorney, and we were all talking about why are these ballots showing up as late as they did. I was inside the TCF Center, and I watched them bring ballots in on carts, boxes of ballots.
So they were like open boxes where you could see the ballots in, or
Yeah,
you saw them?
they were no different than the ones that were already there. And then what they did is they put them out, and so there was a center raised stage, and then they had tables off to the side, and they would put the ballots off where they were already picking up the ballots, how they were doing normal business, right? I was under the impression that all of those should have been segregated and separated. Well, they weren't. They were put right up there, and then the person or the people that were running the election process basically encouraged the table supervisors in the tables to come up and get work. That's how they were describing it. Come up and get work. Come up and get work. So those ballots, they were running ballots.
Just one more. Did you have any idea how many there were, or do you have any way of knowing?
Yeah, so the attorney that was there, or the counsel that was there, we were all trying to take a rough estimate, and it looked like there was maybe 60 boxes of those ballots, and in each one of those sleeves or boxes or whatever, there could have been hundreds of ballots. So we're thinking maybe several thousand, tens of thousands. I'm not sure the exact number.
Did anybody have any earmarkings of who they were carrying these ballots? Were they carrying them? Were they on a dolly?
Yeah, they were on a dolly. Yeah, they were on a dolly. Do I know who they were? Absolutely not. But we were definitely perplexed that these were coming in so late, as well as they were being put out to be counted.
So, and then we had a new shipment announcement by Mr. Baxter at 4:30 a.m. on the microphone. He's saying, hey, we're going to have some ballots coming in. So these boxes of ballots were brought in by Mr. Baxter and his team at 4:30 a.m. from the rear of the room of the TCF Center. So approximately, I witnessed them bringing in boxes from the rear end of the room into the room. This is between 4:30 and 5. I estimate around 84 boxes placed on tables in the center of the room. Each box with approximately 600 ballots, totaling to approximately 50,000 ballots, equal to the 2 rounds before. Because we were there from 10 to 1, we did a round about 50,000, and then 1 to about 4, a second round about another 50,000, and then this last round, all you have to know is it was the same amount of ballots from the other 2 rounds. I'm not sure if they were all brought in from the back, because I think they were commingled and also brought in from other rooms. So I'm not sure how many ballots were brought in from the back and then from the other areas, but they're put in all. It was just about the same amount. Most volunteers left at 5 a.m. and the poll workers had a shift change between 5 and 6 a.m. I stayed. At 6 a.m., Mr. Baxter and the management got back on the microphone and yelled, "This is what democracy is supposed to look like," in front of everyone with the new shift. Right after that, the whole room cheered, and you can tell that there was not a balancing in the poll workers there, even at that shift.
Did they, after they put them on these 10-foot tables, were workers taking the ballots and then putting them into the machine?
Yeah, so that's when Mr. Baxter said, "This is what democracy is supposed to look like." Then they came in and took the ballots, the employees took the ballots, took them back to their processing tables, and everyone just did it at once. And most of the Republican workers were gone at that time.
Did you or anyone you know ask where the origin of the late-night ballot delivery was? What precincts it came from?
I did not ask. However, the person right next to me grabbed me by the, pulled me to the side and said, "I see a truck at the loading dock coming in the back of the TCF Center." And by the time I looked, Mr. Baxter and his management team were personally holding in boxes and carrying them in to the tables.
The other deliveries, they didn't come in this way?
No, this delivery was unlike every other that I witnessed from the other 2 rounds. Yeah.
Numbers. At approximately 4:03 a.m., a poll worker announced 50 boxes of ballots coming in. Election workers loudly cheered. Woo! Why? Did they know that they were for Biden? Was it a Biden dump? We don't know, huh?
And I saw the huge dump of ballots that were delivered to the counting hall. I noticed that the City of Detroit Clerk's office there was their emblem on the white van that showed up with the ballots. Janice Winfrey's name was on there, and a number presumably for Janice Winfrey's office. I estimated that it was over 50 boxes that I counted, and I estimate that up to 1,000 could have been fit in each box. There was no chain of custody. There was no accountability. There was no transparency. Nobody knew where these ballots had been. They had to be turned in at 8 p.m. They showed up at approximately 3:30 a.m. So 7.5 hours is a long time for these ballots to be kind of in limbo, not with anyone knowing where they are. There have been no answers up to this point, and whistleblowers are being intimidated.
Your gut reaction when you were there at that time of the morning and seeing these ballots coming in and not seeing any other ballots around for 2-3 hours before that, right? What was your feeling, or what was it that you made any reference to about those ballots?
I didn't know why they would be there. I started stepping back and asking myself, why would things close at 7 and 8, and then at 4 o'clock in the morning, this proliferation of ballots would arrive? So I just had questions that just didn't seem to make sense from that perspective, but I think others maybe want to make comments as to why those were so late.
Are those boxes consistent with what you've heard the testimony? You were sitting here during the testimony earlier. Was all the boxes of ballots that were delivered to the TCF You didn't see if they came in the back door, you didn't see.
I went to the back door when they came in, so I did see the truck. I did see them being unloaded. I saw a gentleman with a dolly that would bring some of them. I actually took the time to walk over to the tables in the center to watch them get stacked.
On Wednesday, November 4th, I learned that tens of thousands of ballots had arrived at TCF Center from Wayne County, which was after the election deadline of 8 p.m. on Tuesday, November 3rd. Surprised and concerned that so many ballots appeared after the election deadline, I felt compelled to drive to TCF Center to volunteer as a nonpartisan election challenger. I witnessed ballot after ballot being counted for unlisted voters. Unlisted voters are ballots not registered in either the electronic nor the supplemental paper-based absentee voter poll book. The unlisted voters had no dates of birth in contrast to the registered voters, but they continually entered the default birth date of January 1st, 1900 into the computer system to process these votes.
Right off the bat, I saw table supervisors distinguished with the emblem on the chest wearing political statements. Saw Black Lives Matter on masks. I saw T-shirts, undershirts wearing Black Lives Matter.
Election workers were allowed to wear Biden T-shirts, blue face masks, the ones I recognized on Gretchen Whitmer's face in some of her interviews on Charlie Langston's show. I also saw poll workers wearing Black Lives Matter face masks, which is a political movement. Joe Biden is moving to defund the police. Thank you very much.
And it was interesting because in the guide or in the handbook, it does say that no propaganda is allowed inside of the polling center. And I did see Black Lives Matter masks. And again, I feel there's nothing wrong with that, but I feel like that's a double standard. And I feel that it's wrong that people can have that and it's okay.
And we had a parade of Black Lives Matter in Rhine.
I was at the canvassing board meeting that Monica Palmer spoke about earlier. And I will just tell you, it was extremely hostile. It was very personal. It was very aggressive with regards to the threats that were made to her personally, her family.
I just want to let you know that the Trump stink, the stain of racism that you, William Hartman, and Monica Palmer have just covered yourself in is going to follow you throughout history. Your grandchildren are going to think of you like Bull Connor or George Wallace. Monica Palmer and William Hartman will forever be known in southeastern Michigan as two racists who did something so unprecedented that they disenfranchised hundreds of thousands of black voters in the city of Detroit. But just know when you try to sleep tonight, that millions of people around the world now on Twitter know the name Monica Palmer and William Hartman as two people completely racist and without an understanding of what integrity means or a shred of human decency. The law isn't on your side, history won't be on your side, your conscience will not be on your side, and Lord knows, when you go to meet your maker, your soul is going to be very, very warm.
I was on the ballot, and I'm the state rep-elect for House District 4, and we have been without a state representative since March 29th. So while you may show us your caucasity today in refusing to certify the election and making note that you are okay with certifying all of Wayne County except Detroit, know that we see what's happening. Know that there is nothing other than Jim Crowing that is going on right now. You are standing here today telling folks that Black Detroit should not have their votes counted. And know the facts. You are certainly showing that you are a racist. You may say that you are not. You may claim that you are not, but let's be very clear. Your words today and your actions today made it clear that you are okay with silencing the votes of an 80% African-American city. And what that tells us is you, Miss Monica Palmer from Grove, which has a history of racism, are deciding to enable and continue to perpetuate the racist history of this country. And I want you to think about what that means for your kids who probably go to Grove, and when they see all their Black classmates.
And I would just say that really didn't have any place, and nobody shut that down. It was high intimidation. And Mr. Kinlock or his other representative on the Democratic side, made no comments to calm this down. So when the vote was taken to not certify, of course, there was a side discussion that actually had some other further developments that everybody's aware of. You know, I would just say, nobody talked about the fact that they had so many out-of-precinct locations. When the meeting began, a pile of affidavits were set on the table. Mr. Kinlack said they were received by himself in that day. They really weren't used, reviewed, or anything, just submitted to minutes. So really no benefit in providing that. The meeting was delayed by 2 hours to start, a very strange delay. As Monica said, there was no executive summary. The numbers were rattled off regarding out of balance. I would just say it was a very hostile environment, and the main takeaway from my side is, I think you guys know, an out-of-balance precinct can't be recounted. That doesn't make any sense. If it's out of balance, it should be.
There is a campaign of terror that is being instituted by people such as Attorney General Dana Nessel to coerce public officials into certifying the vote and rubber stamping this insanity as quickly as possible.
Since working at the TCF Center, I've read where some leaders of the Michigan Legislature indicate that they have not been made aware of any information that would change the outcome of the election. I wish that were the case. Tens of thousands of ballots arriving after the election deadline provide a minimum of tens of thousands of reasons to investigate and audit these ballots. I've also read where some leaders of the Michigan Legislature indicate that Michigan's certification process should be free from threats and intimidation. The problem is that Michigan's certification has not been free from threats and intimidation. I refer this committee, I refer the people's representatives in Michigan to the affidavit submitted by Ms. Monica Palmer, chairperson of the Wayne County Board of Canvassers, and by Mr. William Hartman,
1 minute,
member of the Board of Canvassers of Wayne County. And finally, if you read their affidavits, that is for Ms. Palmer and Mr. Hartman, it is clear that they did not certify Wayne County's results. And since they did not certify Wayne County's results, how can the Board of State Canvassers certify any results? It's a mess. It's a mess for the Michigan Legislature. But it's time for the Michigan Legislature to step up and step in, and because at this point, I don't see how you can send any electors to the Electoral College.
I am Monica Palmer. I am the chair of the Wayne County Board of Canvassers. As you may be aware, after the primary, we had 76% of the precincts, the absentee precincts in the city of Detroit were unrecountable because they were out of balance without explanation. We had bipartisan support and a request for an investigation by the State Bureau of Elections, and we requested the Secretary of State to assist with administering the general election in November in the city of Detroit for the absentees. We had gone through the initial canvass of about 20% of the absentee counting boards and realized that the number of voters in the poll book, so people cast, did not match the number on the tabulator tape, ballots cast. It is the job of the canvass, the county canvass, to correct any mathematical errors, to make those two numbers balance or reconcile the difference. The good news here is that the batches of ballots that may have been scanned multiple times, the job of the canvass is to catch that mathematical error and correct it. So if you have 100 voters, 100 ballots that were issued, and there's 300 ballots that were tabulated, you count the ballots in the box, it should match the ballots that were issued, 100, 100. You retabulate them, and that's corrected. Things you cannot catch in the in the canvass. You cannot catch date stamps on envelopes. You cannot catch the validity of a voter, whether they're dead or not. You cannot catch signature verification. Those are things we do not look at within the canvass. Just a little point of reference to help you manage through the details you're hearing. 20% into processing the absentee ballots, we realized we had a large portion that did not match. And it's standard procedure to contact the clerk when you have that happen to ask if they have any envelopes that may not be scanned, if they have anything stuck in an auxiliary bin, ask them for a corrected list if possible. We did not get corrected statement of voters, so people cast, until 13 days after the election. It was the afternoon, the day before certification, when a large black tote was brought into the canvas containing multiple precincts' new voter lists. Some of those voter lists managed to make the balances work out. At the end of the day, less than 24 hours later, the canvas was given a verbal report for the plus and minus. We were not provided with an executive summary written, even though I requested one. And that oral report, my quick math showed that 71% of the counting board, but 71% of those counting boards were unexplained without, were unbalanced without explanation. Having less than 24 hours to get corrected voter lists and going through 134 counting boards to make those differences is not a lot of time. And that is why I originally voted no on the certification, because I believe the state needed 10 more days to continue to dig through that to find those explanations. One more item to note, in the State Board of Canvassers meeting, Daniel Baxter said that they did not issue any revised poll lists. I don't know if he was misinformed or misspoke, but there were clearly an entire tote of revised lists delivered the day before the certification. And I'm happy to answer any questions, and due to time, if you have additional questions, please reach out to me afterwards.
All right, thank you, Monica. And I heard stories about how you were threatened and bullied and attacked by a lot of these radical left-wing people, and so I have my sympathies for that. And you have my sympathies for that. I know you've been through a lot, and it's courageous for you to be here and testifying today. So thank you.
First thing we noticed was that there are 643 precincts in Michigan with a voter turnout above 80%, which is a little bit anomalous. There were 21 precincts that were over 90%, 10 precincts that had exactly 100% voter turnout, and 6 precincts that were over 120% voter turnout. So as we began to look at that, my team focused on anomalous patterns where votes were entered in an amount of time that was physically impossible for the tabulation machines to process the votes. And so we found four spikes in the analysis that exceeded the tabulation machine's ability to process that amount of votes in a timeline. And that was in Kent County, Macomb County, Oakland County, and Wayne County. And again, this data was from Dominion and published, in open source. So those anomalies pointed us to a couple other things that some of your previous witnesses, who I just heard tonight, but the incremental absentee vote punches there was a big move from 652 on the morning of the 4th, 16,000 absentee votes were processed. Between 652 and 749 local time on the 4th, an additional 213,429 absentee votes were processed, and this aligns with some of the observations that the previous witnesses made. And then at 11:15 that same morning, in a time period of about 8 minutes, which correlates to the time our previous witness, Ms. Jessie, testified, there was 56,098 votes processed in an 8-minute period. Now, each one of these machines can process about 20,000 votes an hour. So you can do the math yourself, or it's in our affidavit. So the anomalous activity led us to believe that just looking at the data, that there were red flags for fraudulent activities, and we have subsequently asked for our team or someone else to do the forensic analysis to determine exactly what happened with those votes and those spikes that could not have been mathematically processed with the amount of machines that were present in the facilities.
So where's the fraud?
Over 229 deceased people voting, that's fraud. That's not my definition of fraud. That's just the generally accepted definition of fraud. And 2,660 vacant addresses of burnt down lots, and these people voted, the dead people voted, that's fraud.
Dead people were voting. I sent a website to that effect, and the list that they had up to that date was 17,327 randomly checked Michigan voters that were registered for voting and were above the age of 80. Every name on this list has voted in the 2020 election. Check for yourself, and has also been found in one or more of the obituaries online.
71% of Detroit cannot be recounted, which means that the boxes that the ballots are in cannot be opened. 71% is egregious, and it happens in these communities of color. So if you cannot recount it because of a, quote, clerical error, according to Secretary Benson, these are not clerical errors. These ballots are hidden in. You can hide them in there until you're able to open them. There are processes that have been allowed so that when you cannot balance your precinct, you can go to a counting board or a board to evaluate them. At that time, those errors are supposed to be fixed, and they can open up the ballots. The only way to open up the ballots right now to get your ideas on it is for you to do a complete forensic audit that needs to be done to open up those ballots. Because a recount is only going to get you 71% of the ticker tape that says these are the numbers, and there are bad ballots inside. You cannot look at the ballots if you do a recount. You need an audit in order to do a forensic audit to look at those ballots. Some absentee ballots that were coming in were not even folded. How do you have a pristine, flat ballot without being folded if it was an absentee ballot? And therein lies some of the problems. And once it goes into the machine multiple times, you cannot open up the case. If you put the wrong number on the seal, you can't open it up. If you put in, if it doesn't balance, you can't open it up. And so there's problems with what's going on. We need to open up those ballots for the integrity, because we cannot move forward in any further election.
So I am curious, because I understand that a lot of them didn't balance. What is the appropriate process once you get done with the election and you've done the ballot count and you realize that they're not balancing? What would the appropriate process be right then?
The precinct inspectors or the precinct captain, who is supposed to be trained, are supposed to contact the clerk's office if there's any problem with balancing. You're supposed to know and have your hand on how many provisional ballots, how many spoiled ballots, where are the missing ballots, what's going on. You're supposed to take care of it at the precinct level and then close your precinct. But if some reason you're not able to, there's a counting board where you take your ballots to turn them in to say, I testify that I did this, and I've got my paperwork, I've got my poll books, I've got the notes written down in the poll books or in our electronic poll books. And that counting board is supposed to say, you're not in balance. Let us open up that container and make sure those poll books we can look at the ballots. We physically can look at them. But in these urban areas, they're lazy, and they're not taking this, the civic right very seriously, or their duties very seriously. They take an oath when they do as a precinct inspector. They are not taking it seriously and have not for years. And the apathy toward the official duties here has become egregious, because once they decide not to balance that precinct, then it goes through and you have the hot mess that you had, where you have these canvassers, board of canvassers, 4 people that is supposed to amend that mess. Flint has never been able to balance. Never been able to balance, and there's touch points across where they have the ability to open that up, to do a quote, honest open of the ballot itself, the container itself. If you're not able to open that container up, which after it leaves the counting board, you're not able to do it unless you get a court order or an audit. And no one has been brave enough to do it. 71% of Detroit cannot be recounted. We have nothing. And when we did a recount before, we saw some of the most egregious things when we looked through and did recounts before in Detroit. There's some things in there that should never have been in there. And that is what I'm telling you about when you're able to open up those ballot boxes. But it is not going to be at the Detroit canvasser level, and certainly not at the Michigan State Board of Canvasser level.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Given that we have paper ballots in Michigan, why on earth did you not ask for a recount?
Well, there'd be no reason to ask for a recount, because you just recount the same fraudulent ballots. Once you have separated the envelope from the absentee ballot or mail-in ballot, you are forever unable to audit them. That's the reason why it is so critical that they be inspected. That's the reason why from time immemorial that's been done and honored by both political parties, and honored in the breach by your political party this time nationwide. 71%. There is no way, when they recounted in Atlanta, they just recounted all of the same fraudulent ballots. There's no way to trace those ballots, and that's why the inspection is so critical. And the reality is, if your political party had not bullied, pushed people around, intimidated people, and stopped them from doing their job as inspectors, this would not have happened.
I think what Representative Camilleri is asking is perhaps why is it that more people, and I know we have a couple here today, but why is it that we're not having more people come forward? I mean, it seems like if there was all this widespread fraud that, we'd have dozens and dozens of people.
I'll tell you why. My life has been destroyed. My life has been completely destroyed because of this. I've lost family. I've lost friends. I've been threatened. My kids have been threatened. I've had to move. I've had to change my phone number. I've had to get rid of social media. Nobody wants to come forward. They're getting threatened. Their lives are getting ruined. I can't even get an actual job anymore. I can't. Because Democrats like to ruin your lives. That's why.
All right.
This is the most important election in my lifetime, and I think the most important election in the history of our republic. Every legislator, whether seated in the House or the Senate, whether Democrat or Republican, took an oath to defend the U.S. and state constitutions of the U.S. and Michigan against enemies both foreign and domestic. Time is of the essence, and now is the time to fulfill that oath. Despite what the media is telling everyone, there are mountains of evidence that voter fraud occurred on a massive scale, the likes of which we've never witnessed in the country.
30 seconds.
For those politicians that say we have to tighten up the election process relative to mail-in ballots for future elections, you admit that there are problems, and you propose to fix those problems sometime in the future. I and millions of Americans say no. You must fulfill your oath and do your duty to the citizens of the state and country now. You can't turn a blind eye to the mountains of evidence proving the fraud, and the citizens of this state expect the state legislators to act swiftly to correct the fraudulent activity that took place in this election. Because time is of the essence, this cannot wait for the completion of the lawsuits currently underway.
Keep in mind that you could not videotape at TCF. It was strictly prohibited, potentially a criminal act. That's why all of these sworn affidavits, there's hundreds and hundreds of them, are so important, because they are the key proof that severe impropriety took place in Detroit on election night. So all we want is a proper, thorough, independent investigation into what the hundreds of whistleblowers are coming forth and saying, with a forensic audit of all the suspicious ballots. We know what these investigations would yield, and we suspect that the interests desperately trying to obstruct the investigations, I think we know I think they know what would be found as well. So I implore you to do the right thing, and, for your country, for your family, for your conscience, and stop this fraud. Thank you.
I have a very different perspective on how secure our elections are, experiencing all that I did. It's very disturbing and disheartening. As you've heard today, there is much credible evidence that the chain of custody was broken time and time again, which created an election with no integrity. Michigan citizens are needing to trust our election system and our state. We are asking for a fair and honest election to be certified.
Now, I said about my jobs, integrity was important because lives depended on it. Well, it's no less any important that we have integrity in the election, because the life of the country as a democratic republic depends on it. This nonsense has got to stop. We got to take the steps that it takes that the legislature can take to make sure that we have fair elections, because I've never seen anything like this before. And like I said, this goes against my grain and everything that I know as a person, as a professional. And like I said, I don't want to ever see anything like that again.
As an American citizen and on behalf of the people of Michigan, I'm here to demand that you remember you took an oath to defend the country from enemy, domestic and foreign. Remember, it is your moral, ethical, and lawful duty today to seek for an investigation on the chain of custody. Demand election integrity. Demand a detailed forensic audit. You can go into history as the heroes for doing something right for this country and bringing to light what is hidden, or as cowards who didn't have the courage to protect the election integrity. You will be remembered as those who took a courageous and political incorrect stand, or as dishonest people who side with the fraud. It is your choice. Thank you.
What are you guys going to do about it? You know, I know you can hear it all, but if we're not going to take action on a definite fraud to the system, if you're just going to kick it down the road and worry about it tomorrow, and maybe this is something that we can correct the next time around, you've missed an opportunity to stop what's going on.
It should be amazing to us that only Republican and nonpartisan workers were denied access to legally observe what is supposed to be a fair and transparent election. And it should not even be questioned when a Republican watcher or challenger is not at each table. I'm 67 years old, and I cannot stand the idea that our country could go down under an unfair election.
What specifically do you want us to do? Is it you're coming here today and saying that based on all of these concerning issues, you want the State House and Senate of Michigan to hand the president the 16 electoral votes for Michigan? Is that what your ask is today?
No, I didn't ask that. I asked that you hold, that you take back your power under Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of the Constitution, that you take back that power, and that you spend the time, not just to listen to, I gave you you shouldn't decide anything based on what I gave you. It's just a sample. It's just a sample of things. There's a plethora of evidence that you can go through that will convince you that this election was stolen. I would ask you to go through that. Don't let it just get taken from us, and then we'll find out a year from now what the real plot was. And take a look, to some extent, at what happened in other states. Because the fact that it's so similar in other states gives you a sense that what we're dealing with here was a plan, not just an accidental, oh gosh, Detroit stole an election, or Chicago stole an election, or New York stole an election. But I think you have a responsibility to go into session, take back look, the people who certified your election, what are they worth? Can't trust them. I wouldn't have put my name on that piece of paper. Not worth anything. The piece of paper's a lie. We all know it's a lie. We know the figures there aren't correct. They're such wonderful public servants, they put their name on a lie. Why don't you spend the time to find out what the right numbers should be?
I guess, Mr. Mayor, my problem is we have these certifiers who I think, and maybe I'm wrong, but at least in one particular example, they didn't feel confident. They certified the vote. And now you're asked, the legislature is to take, and if I'm wrong again, tell me, to take evidence that, and put my name to it and say that this is definitely what happened. This is somebody won. I assume it wasn't Kanye West. I don't know. But to figure it out, and you want us to make the decision and then put our stamp of approval on it.
No,
Is
I
that
don't
what
want you
you're
to do it. The Constitution of the United States says you should do it.
Thank you. And I appreciate all of the members of the panel. And typically what I've done before 2 other states is to explain the Constitution and to explain your duty. However, in this particular legislature, it's very apparent that the circus has only been from one side. The witnesses that have appeared before you today have done so as honest, sincere, and forthright citizens bringing concerns to you. And when you are saying that there are concerns but only looking forward, you're not doing your constitutionally obligated and mandated duty. And what we're here to do today is to present to you the evidence that we've been able to do in the last 4 hours. Mayor Giuliani is very correct that this is only a sample. But no honest person can hear these citizens of your own state today look at what happened in Wayne County with the bullying of the 2 GOP Board of Canvassers when they didn't want to certify the election, and can let this proceed. What the Constitution obligates you to do is to take back your plenary power, because the certification was false, clearly. And you can do that, and you should do that, because you have an obligation as state legislators. Now, normally, when I've testified in front of state legislators, it's about policy and it's about legislation. This isn't about policy, it's not about politics, it's not about Democrat versus Republican, it's not even about President Trump versus Joe Biden. This is about election integrity. This is about making sure that the people of the state of Michigan are not disenfranchised based on fraud and corruption. That's the reason that we are here. And I asked you at the very beginning to put aside your party and your preconceptions to listen honestly to the people who've appeared before you. Now, I've been a part of many court trials, and you as the fact finders, of course, can determine and assess their credibility. They have sworn affidavits that they all indicated to you they swore under penalty of perjury. That's actually a very big deal for a citizen to come forward and do that. They're doing this because they're patriots and because America cannot function and exist without free and fair elections. Our founders understood that, and that's why they obligated you to be the last guardians of that process. What we're asking you to do is not something that is unheard of. It's not even something that hasn't been contemplated by our United States Supreme Court, which held in that 1892 case that was then cited favorably in Bush v. Gore, that this is your plenary, meaning absolute power. And if you, after an investigation, find that you want to certify the results, that is your prerogative. What we asked initially in the filing of our lawsuits, which, Representative, there were only 3 initially. It's not true that there were 39, and we would appreciate the facts being straight.
There are 39.
We have, not from the Trump
Representative, let's continue.
not from the Trump campaign. And other concerned parties have certainly brought forward lawsuits for election integrity on their own. And we may have similar interests, but the campaign doesn't represent their lawsuits. But what we asked initially was to simply stop the certification because we had significant, not just concern, but actual evidence. And what you've heard today is not just a speculation, it's not just concern, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's people who were there, who were eyewitnesses, who were telling you what they saw. This was election officials who have violated the laws of your state that you as the General Assembly passed in order to preserve election integrity. There are two different tracks. You have the laws of the state that election officials on the ground are supposed to adhere to, and then you have the issue with dominion. Now, absolutely, the mayor is right that you need to audit those machines, but you have more than enough just based on the election official absolute fraud, absolutely ignoring the laws of this General Assembly, the laws of your state, to reclaim your authority. That is your duty, it's your constitutional obligation, and that's why we are in front of you. So I'm happy to answer any questions on the constitutionality, on anything, but I would simply urge you that this is not about policy, it's not about politics, it's not about Democrats versus Republicans. This is about making sure that we are not the generation that is the weakest link in America, that does not preserve and protect our free and fair elections and our right to select our commander-in-chief into the next generation. That's what this is about. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any questions?
Official, and are you saying that some of us should not, our votes don't count?
Not at all, Madam Representative. The point is that when so much fraud dilutes the vote of the people that you serve and your constituents, then it's irredeemably compromised. And you may like the outcome of this fraud, but imagine if there were witnesses that were testifying to the exact same thing and the outcome had been for President Trump. The point here is that corruption is corruption and it dilutes the vote, and that cannot stand. And so no, your state has not actually selected anyone for president. I mean, in fact, the representative said Kanye, maybe, he doesn't know. I think that's where everyone is at, where we don't know. And what we do know is that there has been a massive amount of fraud, irregularities, and
Thank you.
Well, I'm still finishing, thank you. There have been massive amount of irregularities. There have been ignorance and complete disregard for the law of the state of Michigan. And so when it is so irredeemably compromised, when you have something like what's happened in Wayne County, you have the intimidation of officials who are trying to do the right thing, intimidation even here in this committee of witnesses. That is unacceptable, and you should reclaim your constitutionally obligated authority so that you can make sure that the person that you send your delegates for genuinely reflects your constituency. And I hope that your constituency would demand and require that of you.